good tonight. You know, this is the most outrageous spectacle I've ever witnessed, ever. There's only one thing I wish. I sure gotta pee. And this ain't nowhere to go. I believe we're gonna go up the country a little bit right now.
Can't Hit Heat, going up the country. Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist at John Jay College here in New York. It doesn't take much of a radical imagination to understand that the drug war and subsequent mass incarceration in this country is one of the best examples of the links between what Martin Luther King Jr. described as the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism. Drug policy has always been and is race policy. The proportion of people incarcerated for a drug offense in state prison who are Black or Latino, although these groups use and sell drugs in similar rates as whites, is 57%. Michelle Alexander, in her classic work, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, has meticulously documented the scapegoat nature of the drug war as a political strategy to win elections by going after and incarcerating disproportionate numbers of young, poor Black men for illicit drug use. An intentional and institutional war of structural violence on the most vulnerable, oppressed, and marginalized communities in the country. This state violence, specifically hyper-militarized policing, has proven to be more dangerous for poor people than the drugs themselves. Furthermore, these links are increasingly being seen in many other parts of the world, often as models or under the direct or indirect influence of American eradication and interdiction global war on drugs policy. It's a so-called foreign policy rooted in paramilitary operations, covert military activities to support groups that often themselves are involved in lucrative and illicit large-scale narco-trafficking, dominated by organized crime. For example, the number of people killed in Mexico's drug wars since 2006 is well over 100,000 people and rising. The destruction of Mexican and Central American societies, encompassing over 100 million people, has much to do with the conflicts between drug cartels and the political regimes of the region. And the multi-hundred billion-dollar drug trade draws on the support of the United States banks to realize their profits. They also spend hundreds of millions on the U.S. arms industry and employ tens of thousands of recruits for their vast private armies and civilian networks. Their governments often act as a conduit for U.S. Pentagon, federal police, Homeland Security, drug enforcement, and political apparatuses prosecuting the war. We have two incredible guests on the show today. They've both taken great personal and professional risks to educate and fight for humane and transformative approaches to drug policies here, in Brazil, and around the world. Julita Lemgruber is the coordinator for the Center for Studies on Public Security and Citizenship in Brazil and has been in the forefront of the struggle against Brazil's staggering levels of police violence and human rights disaster that has been the fourth largest prison system in the world. Carl Hart faced death threats on a recent trip to the Philippines for speaking out against President Duterte's drug war there, which has already killed more than 8,000 people in 8 months, arrested close to 50,000 drug suspects, with Duterte threatening to kill more. As a neuroscientist and Columbia University's Psychology Department chair and professor of psychology and psychiatry at Columbia, he is the author of the groundbreaking book, High Price, and the first tenured African-American head of a department in the sciences at Columbia. And before we meet them in person, let's play a very short clip of Lady Sings the Blues by Diana Ross in her portrayal of jazz singer Billie Holiday.
Billie Holiday? Billie Holiday?
Yes, that's me.
I'm Detective Henn in New York City Police Department, Narcotics Division. We got a warrant for your arrest.
Sings the blues. She's got a man, and she feels so sad. Want the world to know just what her blues is all about. If I should take a notion to jump into the ocean, ain't nobody's business if I do. If I go to church on Sunday, then cabaret all day Monday, ain't nobody's business if I do. I swear I won't call no copper if I'm beat up by my papa, ain't nobody's business if I do. 'Cause I'd rather my man would hit me than for him to jump up and quit me, ain't nobody's business if I do. If my man ain't got no money, and I say, take it all, honey, ain't nobody's business if I do. Nobody's business, ain't nobody's business, nobody's business if I do.
So welcome, Julita and Carl, to the Radical Imagination. It's great to have you here, and I'm just so in awe of your activism, your passion and energy in dealing with the drug issue and the drug war in a way that we often don't deal with and don't truly understand. So again, enormous respect, and
my pleasure.
Thank you so much for being here and explaining what you're doing. Let's start with Carl here, and then we'll get to Brazil in just a minute. But Carl, you've been in the forefront of trying to transform our thinking concerning drugs. In what way?
Damn, that's a big ass question, Jim. In what way? Well, there are so many myths about drugs, so I'm trying to help people to understand that what they think about drugs oftentimes are informed by misinformation. So we oftentimes think about drugs as being this dangerous boogeyman that is in need of control and restraint, such that we're willing to sacrifice certain people's freedoms for that. And so I'm trying to help people to understand that, no, we shouldn't be sacrificing people's freedoms for our misconceptions. For example, let's think about now the current opioid crisis. The country is losing its mind. Clearly there are people who have died, and that we should be worried about people dying from drug-related deaths. But when we think about why those people are dying, we have been less good at understanding what's going on. For example, 75% or more of the people who die from opioids do so as a result of having multiple drugs on board, like other sedatives in combination with those opioids. So your sort of fix or your solution should not really be to go after the opioids. Your solution should be try to educate folks and tell them what drug combinations are potentially more dangerous than others, and help them to avoid those drug combinations or take lower doses. That's one solution. Another concern related to drug-related deaths with the opioids is people may have adulterated drugs. They have drugs that are cut with substances that they're not aware of, and those substances themselves are more dangerous than, let's say, the opioid like heroin. And the fix to that is kind of simple as well. Public health officials can simply set up free drug testing purity services, such that people understand or they know whether they have adulterants in their drugs, and that way you help to keep people safe. So those are just a few of the sort of misconceptions, and those are misconceptions that are related to the current sort of crisis.
Well, that was the thrust of the question, to get us into a discussion of why this hardline punitive perspective, the criminal justice model, has evidently been so pronounced around the world and in this country. And so your work is trying to turn the corner here on this, and Juliet as well, right? In Brazil, you're fighting the same forces that Carl has been up against.
Yes, you know, in Brazil, we have reached a number of people incarcerated that is just amazing, you know, amazing in a sad way. We are the fourth largest, so we have the fourth largest prison population in the world today. So it's like Brazil and other countries in Latin America follow this US example of incarcerating people for drug-related offenses. So although in Brazil the use of drugs in theory does not carry a prison sentence, so the use of drugs is still a crime in Brazil, but it says that if you are caught as an user, you will get an alternative to prison sentence. But then, as you know, as
that's the theory.
That's the theory. But then, as it happens in many places, so if the police catches a white kid living in a so-called nice neighborhood, So he attends a private university and blah, blah, blah. So the police will not arrest this kid. Even, he may be carrying a large amount of drugs, whatever drugs we're talking about. And then the police will just let him go or will receive some bribe from this kid. But then if the police catches, a black kid that comes from a favela, so a slum area, he's in the streets, then he will always be considered a drug dealer and not a user, even though he may be carrying with him a small amount of drugs. So, what we're talking about is that, just like the United States, drug policy, the criminal justice system works in a way to punish, to incarcerate, to show, the weight of criminal justice on minorities, on blacks. So we have blacks overrepresented in the prison system, among those that the police stop and searches every day. So we have a lot in common with the U.S. But then today we are living a situation which is far worse than you have here, by far.
And you've been in the field for decades, right?
Yes.
You were, in a sense, what? You were
when you
head
say
of the
decades, it's,
20, 30 years.
Yeah, well,
You've been not
let's make it 20, 30 years.
20, 30 years.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay,
as we all
Jim.
have.
Okay, Jim.
Exactly.
So
you were the head of the prison system, right?
Yes, I was the
Sao
head
Paulo?
of the prison system in Rio. For a few years in the 90s, and the head of the state prison system.
That's 20, 30 years.
Yeah,
25 years.
yeah, it is. So, and then I was the first police ombudsman in the state of Rio. So I had an office, which was a government position appointed by the governor. So I had an office with people that were there to hear complaints of the population on the police, mainly police violence. So for many years, I worked either with prisons or civilian oversight of the police. So all the time, the issue of drugs was crossing my way. So it was there, it was evident that, this would caught my attention at some point. So after I retired from public service, we started this research center in a private university in Rio, which is called Candido Mendes. And for the last 6 years, I've been focusing on drug policy. So, drug policy now is such an important issue in Brazil and in Rio, for instance, just for your, audience to have an idea. So when I say the situation is much worse than it is in the U.S., so only in the state of Rio, where there are 14 million people, so only in the state of Rio, the police is killing 4 people every day. Can you imagine? 4 people every day. Yesterday, and this, 4 people, not counting those that end up dying on a crossfire between police and drug dealers. So yesterday, for instance, I wish we could have the photo so the
11-year-old girl.
An 11-year-old black, beautiful girl was shot in the head. So she was caught in crossfire just yesterday. So, we have a situation where the war on drugs justify police violence. This is what is so sad, frustrating, and, I really get, it's like, I don't know what else we have to do because, we are in the media in Brazil all the time.
You're bringing this to the
we
attention.
are bringing the attention.
Is this rather new for
we write
Brazilians
op-eds
to hear about this?
The thing is, what happens is police violence is not knocking on the doors of those that live in the beautiful areas of the city. So if you live you know, in Copacabana, in Ipanema, you live in a nice area, you know, right on the beach. The police is not there producing this kind of violence. So today, I posted on Facebook the photograph of this girl that was killed yesterday. And I asked, what if this girl was killed in Ipanema? So the governor would be fired. The governor would be, you know, I don't know, the Secretary of Public Security would be fired.
Be a big scandal.
But then, you know, they are killing poor black young men, or poor black kids get caught on crossfire. And then just to finish this radical reflection, Jim, a part of that, so a part of the killings, so what we're trying to estimate with the help of Professor Carl Hart, I hope we'll be able to come up with some good numbers that will reflect this war on drugs. For instance, every single day, thousands of kids don't get to school in Rio. Thousands of kids. Like yesterday, it was 8,000 kids. They can't get to school because the communities where they live, you know, they're under crossfire between the police and the drug dealers. So they just cancel school. So what is the cost of thousands of kids, poor kids, that cannot get to school? So what about their achievement in education in general? So this has to be measured, you know, to show people that, you know, we are producing an insane society, that not only the police is killing all this, you know, young black kids or children, but also, you know, this violence is producing, you know, you know, it's a ripple effect. So
shredding the social fabric.
Health centers don't open. Schools don't open. You know, so we have to, and this is what.
This is where you met Carl, right? Carl became involved.
We met many years ago, and Carl has been going to Brazil often. Brazilians love him because he is so clear, so direct. You know, he doesn't choose words in his radical imagination. In a way of
speaks his mind.
Yes. So people in Brazil like that.
It's no BS, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's nice. I love the Brazilians as well. You know, as you point out, there are so many connections between what's happening in Brazil and what's happening in the U.S. In the U.S., we have kind of taught Brazilians how to use the drug war to be racist. And
how does that happen, Carl? How does that happen? What's the connection there? Made a statement that you followed the American example. How does that happen? Well, politically, economically, academics?
Well, in the U.S., we have a lot of influence around the world, of course. We have science, we have a number of sort of areas where other people, why reinvent the wheel when other people have done it better? And in some cases, other people have done it more poorly. And so when we think about drug law enforcement, we think about even our science, how we think about drugs. We export these sorts of things, and people sometimes ingest them uncritically. When we think about the war on drugs, or we think about drug law enforcement, there are some assumptions that are made in terms of various drugs. So like crack cocaine is a big deal now in Brazil. There were some assumptions made about crack cocaine in the United States in the 1980s. We assumed, there were assumptions was that it was the most dangerous drug we had ever seen. One hit, you're addicted. The drug causes so much paranoia, so much violence. All of those sort of assumptions were false. But those assumptions were exported. And the Brazilians kind of accepted them uncritically. And they developed a strategy to deal with crack cocaine in a similar way. We now know in the United States we were wrong.
Failed,
and it didn't fail. We were wrong about the things that we said to the public. It didn't fail because it succeeded for a lot of people.
In maintaining the order
it succeeded for jailers, politicians, a wide range of people, but many people in our society paid the price and continue to pay the price.
Right.
Similarly, the same thing is happening now in Brazil. So Brazilians are, they think that they have a drug problem when in fact they have a poverty problem. They have a racism problem. They have all these other problems, but when you don't want to face those problems, it's so easy to say that it's crack cocaine. Let's go after crack cocaine, and then we can we'll go after crack cocaine and solve that problem. But really, that's a distraction and a smoke screen. We're doing it today with the opioids. Drugs are excellent distractions, so you don't have to deal with real issues in your society. Today, we think about the so-called opioid crisis. We can think about the people who are paying the price, or poor white people in suburbia. I mean,
wanted to
hold up. Let me tell you what the real problem is. The real problem is that they don't have jobs.
Exactly.
They've been shut out. That's the real problem. But we can say that it's opioids, and then we don't have to deal with the real problem.
Absolutely. I just want to play a very short piece on OxyContin blues to back up what you just said there. So if we can do that, this is the OxyContin blues. Steve Earle. Ring true, that story, that narrative, to some of the things you've been studying about?
It was difficult for me to understand the words, but I think what Steve Earle was doing was lamenting the fact that jobs have left, and you have OxyContin to kind of ease the blues. I think that's what.
Exactly.
And so absolutely, it certainly is consistent with the evidence, and oftentimes, when people make songs about drugs, they usually get it wrong. So mad props to Steve Earle for getting it right.
Okay, all right. Opiates in Brazil at this point?
No, it's at this point it's not a problem. So heroin is not something that you hear about in Brazil. Not at all. So it's not a problem. You know, of course, you'll find people that use the
Right.
heroin, but you know, the problem that is driving, you know, this war on drugs in Brazil is basically marijuana, cocaine, and crack cocaine. So these are the drugs that are present in this daily, you know, the daily lives of people in Brazil, the daily war on drugs, and
Is a response to what is perceived to be the excessive use among the poor kids?
it's not.
What's the
You know,
perception?
of course, you know, like Carl said, you know, we have imported this idea that, you know, crack is a problem, but this is, you know, actually the fact that you have crack cocaine users, you know, groups here and there in the streets, this of course still attracts a lot of attention, police attention, and like in São Paulo, they had a big crackdown on crack users in an area which is called Cracolândia, which Carl visited, and they had a fantastic program going on called Open Arms, which had been, it was being the object of a monitoring, and so the response was, you know, very good as far as, you know, the people that were using crack, and they were beginning to get jobs. They were in the streets, but they were offered a room in a hotel, a simple hotel, and they were offered jobs. So, and it's called Open Arms because it was an open project in the streets. This was an area where, you know, as a rule, you would have 600 people, you know, in these various blocks, you know, that made a specific area in São Paulo. And so, and this program got to be known outside Brazil and
Notorious area.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the new mayor in São Paulo just crushed the project entirely.
It wasn't known as being notorious. It was known by many people as being successful.
Yeah.
But the various politicians played politics with people's lives, and so they would pit the population against each other and say, "Why are we supporting these people?" On the one hand, but it's like, as Julita said, it was a program that certainly was not expensive because it didn't. They paid them a little salary for keeping the area clean. They made sure they had housing. That meant that you didn't have to see people on the streets, and they had housing. And it was a way to kind of scaffold people to get to the next level.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
To create the perception that they were
Sure.
that they were the trouble.
Yeah.
So when we talk about educating the population, and which is what you both are doing in a sense, in part, how do you get to some of these incredibly deep, profound political and economic and philosophical issues of how we treat each other that transcends nation states, transcends race, ethnicity? It plays itself out in a variety of ways. We've seen, you know, the white middle class counterculture of the 60s, black musicians, white working class. We're talking about human life and human beings, and then the messiness of life and the unfairness of it all, and so on and so on. Drugs as a vehicle, to a certain extent, people use to try to deal with those difficulties, or perhaps also to enjoy life more. So how do we begin to reach this level of freedom, of choice, and educated choice? You're writing a book, in a sense, right, on educating people.
Well, you asked the big question. You asked the question.
I was going to get to it. I was just
So I'm trying to figure out which one you're asking me.
the big question.
Well, you asked multiple questions, like
What you're writing about right now.
what am I writing about?
that involves an education process that obviously the culture needs to go through, that it hasn't gone through. To touch it at this deep level, why are we so nasty and mean and brutal to each other? Why can't we share the economic goods? Why are 8,000 kids not able to go to school during the day? Why are we creating the sort of environments that are destroying young kids' lives even before they get a chance to go to school? I mean, you're the drug researcher, you're the journalist, you're the activist, you both are. You're devoting your lives to this.
I'm not a journalist, I'm a sociologist.
Sociologist.
But I do a lot of, media work.
Media work. And so I guess, again, the big question to narrow it down about is as we go through this process of education, what are we educating people about the economic and political and racial strife that we have? How do we enter into that discussion in academia? How much can it really be?
Jim, you should ask the question and let me answer, because you just go
I'm
on.
answering.
So I don't know exactly what you...
Go ahead.
So when there are so many things going on in that question itself. I mean, it's like one of the things we do in our population in the U.S. is that we pit people against each other by having people think or believe that there are limited resources. And so if there are limited resources, then I'm in competition with you, and therefore I care less about you. And so that becomes a problem. That's a whole big another set of problems. And then so you asking me as an expert in drugs, how do we educate people about drugs? So I mean, those things can be disconnected at some level. But I can tell you,
be connected.
Or they can be, I can tell you what I try to do, and maybe Julita can tell you what she tries to do.
Fair
I mean,
enough.
one of the things that I try to do is I try and help people to see the common ground that they have. For example, we talked about Brazil and the drugs that are most pressing for their war on drugs. Marijuana, crack cocaine, those kind of drugs. And now Brazilians also use things like the psychedelics, ayahuasca, these other kind of drugs, but that they don't inspire a war on drugs. And so the people who use those other drugs do not see the common connection that they have with the crack user. And so one of the things I try to do in this country, as well as in Brazil, as well as all around the world, is to try and help drug users, for example, see alcohol users, tobacco users, all of these folks see that the chemicals that they are ingesting in their bodies, that their body sees these chemicals is just that, chemicals. It doesn't make this moralistic distinction that the society makes. And so if your substance is not vilified, take a look at those other substances that are vilified, and maybe you need to be there standing in support of those people who eventually become vilified, because we say it's their substance that's being vilified, but it's really the people who are being vilified. So that's what I try to do, to help people to understand the common connections that they have
as human beings. Yeah.
Well, in Rio right now, what I'm trying to do as far as, making people understand things. So I'm working with a group of kids from different favelas, so from different poor areas. There are 12 kids, and we've been working with them for 1 year, and like empowering them to be able to be the voices against the war on drugs in their communities. Because, I just, it just breaks my heart when I see the mother of a kid that has been killed by the police. This mother comes, in front of the media, in front of the journalists, with a proof that the kid was working. Look, the police killed my son, but, he was not a criminal, as if. If he were a criminal, it would be justified for the police to kill him. So I'm working a lot with these 12 kids from different favelas. So they are really, for instance, this week they are having media training in Brazil, in Rio. So they've had They're going to be listening to Carl Hart in September when he goes there. So they've been exposed to various professionals, good ones in Brazil working in this area, to try to make them understand what's behind this war on drugs. So now you go to their Facebook pages.
How old are these kids, by the way?
Around 22, 25. Okay. So, and these are, so I chose 12 kids who were already like leaders in their communities as far as being outspoken, having a Facebook page that was very much visited, using their cell phones to register police violence. So they were already doing this. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I brought these kids together to try to, you know, help them really be more clear about what's going on as far as the war on drugs. So it's very interesting because they are the first ones now saying the war on drugs is a war on us. So they chose as the theme of their group, we're going to launch it in August. Maybe I've been thinking that maybe we should wait for you to come to launch the Movimentos, which is hashtag Movimentos. And they have chosen as their motto, you know, this war is not ours. So, you know, I'm very happy because in the last few years, I've been working with educating the public in general about, you know, this war on drugs. So we had, for instance, 2 years ago, we had half a dozen famous cartoonists in Brazil. One of them, Carl Matt, a fantastic person. So we had cartoonists drawing cartoons about the war on drugs. And they're fantastic. I can send to you and maybe, you know,
absolutely.
we can use
here on the show.
So what through humor, we were trying to call people's attention. So the cartoons are very good. So we had these cartoons on the back of buses in Rio for 30 days. So this was part of our campaign. So and we called the campaign. Well, it's here. It's like, well, this is a little bit old. I don't know if it shows. So it's drug trafficking is born out of prohibition. So this is the name of our campaign. And so, you know, we had many phases in this campaign. And
the public's been receptive.
Very
How do you
receptive.
feel? Yeah.
Very receptive.
Okay.
Well, sometimes we get, you know, as usual, you know, there will be people that will say we're crazy and that, you know.
He met some of those people in the Philippines, I think.
Of course.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you know, I think that what keeps me moving is the clear notion that, you know, there's a lot to be done and we can do it. So at this moment, what I want is to raise awareness on this, you know, absolutely unacceptable way the police is behaving in Brazil. It's a little less in São Paulo and in other places in Brazil.
But Rio,
and you know what? It's very interesting because, you know, we have 3 main drug gangs in Rio. So the Red Command, the Third Command, and the Friends of Friends. So these are the 3 gangs that dominate drug dealing in Rio. And they fight each other all the time also. So it's not only that they're fighting the police, but they're fighting each other. So, you know, what I hope is that these kids in the favelas will be the first ones to be able to establish some kind of dialogue, including with these kids who are the same age.
Julita,
you know,
they do other things other than just sell drugs, right? Or-
of course.
Okay. No. Well, when we call them drug gangs, I just want to make sure it's clear that these are alternative economies
Of
where people
course.
have been shut out.
Of course.
Yeah,
Of
okay,
course.
okay.
You know, Brazil, if you take the Gini index, which is the index of inequality in the world. So Brazil, you know, when you look at the index, that Norway and Canada are at the top of the inequality index, Brazil is one of the worst. I mean, it's
The disparity.
Brazil is like together with some African countries. So the levels of inequality in Brazil is outrageous. And of course, these kids, if they had opportunities, they wouldn't be, you know, involved with this kind of business.
Right on.
You know, and the sad thing is that most of them don't get to be 25 years old. So most of them are killed mostly by the police before they're 25 years old. So we are, you know, we are killing a generation of young black kids because we believe in this crazy war on drugs.
And which you've spoken out against and recommending legalization, decriminalization. I mean, that would open up more legitimate avenues opportunities for these kids, right?
Yeah, as Julita pointed out, I didn't know this until you said it today. Brazil, in effect, has decriminalization. You can't go to jail for personal use.
It's not decriminalization, Carl. So
It's
use is still a crime,
Yeah.
but it's a crime that doesn't carry a prison sentence.
I see.
But then,
Yes.
you know,
But I know you pointed out that
but
they,
then,
right,
you know,
right,
the
right.
judges and the police,
right.
you know, it doesn't carry a prison sentence. But if you're black,
Yeah.
It does.
poor,
Is that what you're saying?
it will always
It
do.
does. So it's okay.
Yeah.
So it's right. It's perception. It's police behavior. The laws aren't as it doesn't sound like they're as much of the trouble, right, as how they're unfairly
Applied.
applied.
Yeah, but it's
Yes?
not, I wouldn't say that. It's not only
Okay.
that, because in the law, in the drug law that is in effect in Brazil today, and we have to understand one thing, Brazil, differently from the United States, Brazil has just one one penal code for the whole country. You know, it's not
Yeah,
like,
not there's
for
50
instance, we
states.
could never have what you have in the U.S. Like you have 8 states plus Washington, D.C., where marijuana is legal for recreational use. That could never happen in Brazil because we have just one penal code for the entire country. So, period.
Right.
So you can have but so the penal code, although the use of drugs doesn't carry a prison sentence, is a crime which should be punished with an alternative to prison sentence. But then what does the law says? When you read, you know, it's like those tricky things in the legislation. When you read there, it says the judge will, when judging if the person is an user or not, the judge will have to pay attention to the personal and the social circumstances of that episode. So
Which is basically
what is
class
the personal
and
and social
race,
circumstance? It's race and poverty.
Yeah.
So judges are as conservative as, you know, they're a reflection of the population. The population in Brazil is very conservative. So, you know, you have a legislation that reproduces this conservatism. And even though they want to sell this legislation as progressive because use will not, in principle, take you to prison, but then if you read between the lines, it's obvious that this legislation was put together in a way that blacks and poor people are criminalized with a prison sentence.
Yes. Yeah.
The power structure is give us a little brief history of the last several years, for example, in Brazil. There's been a new mayor, right?
No mayor in São Paulo.
Okay.
Well, we have elections every 4 years,
Okay.
as you do.
A much more conservative, right-wing.
Well, you
What
know,
do you
if you
call it?
have Trump
Describe it.
now, it's difficult
Right.
to say that Brazil is more conservative.
Well, I'm just getting an
today.
idea of what.
So yeah, well, just to you know,
All right.
you
More
know,
hardline,
I've been
sure.
telling the people in Brazil that if it were not for Trump, I would stay here because the situation in Brazil is so
It really is.
terrible. But with Trump, I really cannot say that I would be happy to be in this country anyhow. So what we have in Brazil, we had a military dictatorship for 25 years. That was between the 60s and the 80s. So after that, we had a leader of the Workers' Party, Lula, who was the leader of the Workers' Party. He was elected in 2003. And then he was re-elected because we have the same system as you have. Presidential system, and every 4 years you have election for after the military dictatorship. So we get Lula for 8 years. A progressive government, sort of, in many ways, yes. Because it's true, there were a lot of social programs that in the long run, it meant that almost 30 million people could not be considered,
Poor.
under poverty levels anymore. So there was social mobility during Lula's years. So we had 8 years of Lula, and then we had 4 years of Dilma, who was Lula's choice for his. So we had the Workers' Party in power for 14 years. Then Dilma got impeached. So now we have a president who is involved. He's been proven to be involved in schemes of corruption that were unheard of when you were talking about Dilma.
Right,
so
right.
we have, this president who is being, exposed in the media every day for schemes of corruption.
And one would expect them to perhaps use the drug issues as a way of deflecting attention.
Well, not really, doesn't
No?
get that, but
No?
not that much
Okay.
at the moment, because the corruption issues are in such an it's just unbelievable. It's undescribable. But what I want to point out is that what we're living today in Brazil and in Rio is we have illegitimate government in place. And then this, in a way, has this ripple effect. And then the police is feeling also
They can do pretty much what they want.
not legitimate because
not,
they are
yeah.
being challenged by what's going on in the drug market, and then there's all this corruption going on. So what you feel is that it's a country, and in Rio, the governor, the ex-governor Rio, is in prison. With all kinds of accusations of corruption. So what you have today in Brazil is an entire collapse of the legitimacy of government and of the police.
Well, in just the couple minutes that we have, perhaps, Carl, would you like to respond to the, trying to make this as focused as possible? Is that a good sign to create a certain illegitimacy of power, of authority? As you try to, go ahead, listen.
I think in the United States we have that too.
Exactly,
but
absolutely.
We didn't create it. The guy who occupies the White House created it, so
Right.
we didn't have to do the work. He's
Right.
doing an excellent job of creating illegitimacy on his own.
So in the last seconds that we have, you as an activist, do you see, how can you approach your agenda in a sense, knowing that this is the case? How do you operate at this point?
I try to be highly focused on what I know, and what I know is drugs in the brain and human behavior. And try and use my skills and try and stay in my lane. And if I do that really well and everybody else stays in their lane, then I think we can actually get something and do something.
Yeah. Data-based, social science.
Thank you.
And that's what I wanted to get across.
Thank you.
Well, listen, thank you. Thank you both for
Thank
being
you.
here. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Learned a lot, man.
See you, Jill.
All right. Great to see you. And thank you all for watching us this week on The Radical Imagination. This is Jim Vrettos, your host, and we'll see you again next week on The Radical Imagination.